Afternoon, welcome. This is actually my first video on this channel, if you want to call it a channel. So camera quality and everything else might not be the most amazing setup, but hopefully you got enough there. I bought this webcam off Temu, for example, so we're working with what we got really. So this channel is going to be about data. Well, not just data actually, it's technology in general. So no terminals if I can help it, no command lines, no computer sciences degree required. This is more for people like accountants, analysts, operation folks, people who live in Excel, maybe Notepad, maybe Word, and want to get a bit more out of what they're doing and use whatever is available out of the box and whatever is already in their work setup. So I'm mostly focusing on Microsoft setup here. So that's the kind of my background actually. I came through accounting, not IT, and most of what I know about data tools, I figured out on the job and just by being curious and experimenting. So I'm trying not to make it too complicated there. Before I get into this Excel part, I just want to be upfront in terms of who this channel is for. I still can't believe I'm saying channel. But if you're in accounting, you're an analyst, someone in ops, an admin person, everyone really, but essentially someone who lives in Excel and does a lot of reporting and you do a lot of the same thing over and over again, I'm hoping this channel is going to be helpful for you. So this is not about making you into a developer, although if you do want to be a developer, I'll guarantee you it's transformational. This is about productivity. I got that benefit when I first started learning about how to automate the boring stuff. I remember the first time I wrote my first VBA, I thought that was magical. And when I learned about databases, and I thought, well, so I don't have to actually export out of a system by clicking a lot of buttons, paste it into an Excel spreadsheet, and do a bunch of joins and transformation. I can literally just run the Excel query, the SQL query on the database, and that will give me exactly what I wanted. That was to me was like, oh my goodness, that was so cool. So I'll try not to sound too IT because again, I didn't come through there. Right, so the Excel lookups. This is what the video is all about. So you see here, we got a bunch of different lookups you can do. You got the classic VLOOKUP. Everyone starts with a VLOOKUP. My whole digital career starts with the VLOOKUP. Just a little story here. So I remember the first time I got hooked into this thing. I was applying for a job as a business intelligence data analyst. It's a very long title. As part of that interview process, the boss to be, mailed me a CD-ROM, 700 megabytes. That's how old I am. And in it was basically just a bunch of CSV files, essentially tables from the database. And my task was basically just to make sense of this data and send a report back to the boss to be. No SQL, no database, essentially just Excel and Word document. And if I remember correctly, oh yes, I do remember. It was about how the up and coming Rapid World Cup in New Zealand is gonna impact the exchange. Now, VLOOKUP was the first thing I did in the whole process. I figured out, I basically looked through all the CSV files. I figured out which one is the primary key. At that point, I didn't know I was supposed to call it primary key. Essentially, how does one CSV file relate to another? Um, and then, yeah, just basically merge all the different tables together. I was living through lookup. I remember I was living in the library and basically trying to get that right. Now, there was also the HLOOKUP, very rare one. Same idea with VLOOKUP, but horizontal. I could not remember the last time I saw HLOOKUP. It's that rare. But I remember I have seen it once. I just can't really tell you when. I've never used it in my professional work, which kind of segue to index and match. I do use this a lot because obviously VLOOKUP only searches one way, right? You search this way and return it from the right. Index and match, you can go both ways. Not even rows, it can be horizontal, it can be any direction. It's very powerful. So I use index and match a lot when I was still living in Excel. And XLOOKUP, the Microsoft newest. To be honest, I've never played with it. When it first, I guess when I first heard about it, I've already moved away from Excel. I've already started doing Python and database queries and C# and a bunch of stuff. So I've moved away from that. But I guess knowing and understanding what XLOOKUP does, it is very powerful. But again, I've seen a lot of Excel spreadsheet up to this day. It's still very rare to see XLOOKUP. A lot of VLOOKUP, a lot of index and match. I haven't really seen a lot of XLOOKUP. But here's the thing that is common in every single one of these: VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, index and match. They're all cell level formulas. You write it in one cell, you drag it down, and now you get the same formulas running on every single row. That's where the problem starts though. So what's actually happening inside of your file? Now imagine you do this. You try to find out the addresses for each client. You do VLOOKUP, you search for the client ID, and the client address is on the table, and you can see that the address is in the third column. You do 3, and then exact match based on what you search, and then boom, you get the address. Pretty easy, right? And then you drag it down, right? Again, simple Excel file. But what actually is happening? Excel is recalculating every single one of those formulas every time anything changes. So every time you open the file, every save, every filter, every scroll, and if you got like it's 2,000 rows, that's 2,000 separate calculations firing at once. Now you probably noticed this. Everyone noticed this. Your Excel spreadsheets gets really slow once it gets too big. Not just the spreadsheet, actually, your whole computer starts to hang. You start making that noises. It's complaining. I'm using too much power. You open Task Manager, you see that your memory blows up. And this is usually when finance people say, I need a new computer. This is too slow. And the IT will come back and say, why do you need a new computer? That's a perfectly standard laptop. And IT obviously doesn't really want to go in there and tells you your Excel spreadsheet is the problem because they might not know either. And that's the whole conversation that really nobody wants to have. So the laptop upgrade requests just keep going through the roof. And I've been in companies where everyone just want new computer, and finance end up having this big computer even some of the developer don't have. Now, manual calculation. I know some people might think, oh, I can just stop it and I can just make it so that the calculation option is manual. So you don't calculate it. It doesn't recalculate. It doesn't trigger off the thing every time something happens. Now, a lot of people do this. I used to do this every time my computer started to complain. Yes, it worked. You fill everything in first, and then you basically turn it on again, and boom, it will recalculate everything, and you get automatic thing again. But it doesn't really fix the problem, does it? And if the file is massive, turning it on and off is still going to hammer your computer, even if it's just temporarily. And more importantly, it does nothing about the next issue I want to show you, which is something that I learned early on when I started playing with Excel and moving on to a database level. So what else is VLOOKUP not telling you? All lookup formulas return the first match, and essentially it silently ignore the rest. Now, I grew up with VLOOKUP. I grew up with VLOOKUP like I've learned this from when I was a baby. Anyhow, it was my thing when I was in Excel. And I didn't realize there was something called cardinality. I probably started hearing about it in my first job as a data analyst. My boss, at that point, explained it to me, and I remember thinking, what the hell are you on about? Because it took me about 3 months and a really bad report to really understood it. So I'll just show it to you. So here I got 2 tables. One is basically the revenue table, and the other one is the client table, which have client ID, client name, and the client can have multiple addresses because they can have multiple branches. Hence why here you'll see 2 records for 1001 because they have 2 branches. And then imagine your boss then say, hey, can you break down the revenue for me by branches? And then, okay, cool. By region, sorry, and say, cool, let me do that. I can just do that. Let me just see what branches there is. It's in the 4th one. I just change that to 4 just to get the region for each client, right? So you have, oh, cool, I get it. Sweet, easy, done. But you see this client here? I don't know if you remember. I just show it to you. They actually got 2 addresses, one in Auckland and one in Christchurch, so 2 region. But look at what the VLOOKUP does. It just gives you the first thing it sees, which is Auckland. Now, Christchurch get nothing. If you start doing your breakdown based on this, Christchurch get nothing, and your whole report is broken. Now, database query doesn't hide this. It will actually duplicate your revenue. So suddenly you have 2 records for this with the same revenue. Again, you can't use that either to do your breakdown analysis because you're basically double counting revenue, double counting a transaction. So that's where you then start doing your analysis. You're basically going back to the business. How do you want me to split? And it's pretty easy. Most people will say just prorata it based on like you have two regions. You just divide that number by 2, right? But this is the thing though. If you use Excel not knowing cardinality and you're like, oh, sweet, done. And so you don't really look at the data and the client address and say, sweet, done, I can do it now. You're suddenly missing a chunk of that breakdown based on the region because caches is not part of it. But if you don't know this either on the database level, you are double counting some of the transaction. So Excel kind of tried to make lookups foolproof and easy to use, but in doing so, it does silently ignore this important concept in data. How do you actually handle a relationship that it isn't one-to-one? It's actually one-to-many. And then once you get to that, how do you handle many-to-many? How do you flag it? How do you make a decision based on how to, when you see that data, do you prorate it? Do you base it on another table? Then base, I don't know, on the population and then divide that by the ratio of the population? Those kind of stuff. Those actually make, I guess, an analysis very, very interesting. Now, Power Query handles this differently. Power Query handle it like a database, and that's why it's powerful, which what I'm going to show you next. Power Query is, hopefully this is going to get exciting for you guys, because honestly, if Power Query was around when I first started my career, I don't think I'd go deeper into the IT rabbit. I'll just stay in finance, just ride the wave. But anyhow, Power Query is essentially a tool that's built into Excel. If you're on a reasonably current version, which you should have, you'll have the ability to do all this magic. Now, the core idea here is different. So different from formulas in the sense that instead of formula that runs once per cell, it's basically you define a process and then Power Query will then run that over the entire data set. And then you can do joins, you can do merging, you can do exception and a bunch of stuff. I might be going too deep into IT terms here, but let me just show it to you and hopefully that kind of makes sense. So how do you get to Power Query? That's usually the first question. So in Excel, you go to data. That should be there. So then you can come up with this queries and connection, essentially showing you what data sets are available in your Power Query. So let's do this. You see here, I have two tabs, one revenue and one client addresses. Sorry, my pretty face probably kind of blocked some of those tab view, but just trust me, there's two tabs. One is revenue and the other one is client address. You can see the data is showing up there. So let's add those into the data set for Power Query, and then we can then merge the two files, essentially doing a lookup. So I'm going to highlight this, and then I'm going to do right click, and I'm going to go get data from table and range. Now, what happened then is I'm going to bring this Power Query view. Automatically, this thing will pop up. I have three screens, so it's going to have to move it around, but it will pop up, and then you can see here, cool, I have the data now. And then it's always a good idea to name it properly. I can name this revenue table. Cool. I can close and load. Again, there's different ways to add data into the data set. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to go through the most simple way. You close and load. Cool. I don't like the fact that it automatically creates a revenue. I'll show you how to get it so it doesn't do that, because if you see here, I have now three tabs. One is the original revenue, and the other one is the revenue table based on the revenue data set that I just highlighted. But anyhow, let's do the same thing for client addresses. You go here, and then you go right click, and you go get data from table or range, and then you say yes, my table has headers, sorry. And then we'll come up with this again. Yep, cool. I'm gonna name it to client. Just name it client. And then instead of that close and load, I'm going to close and load two, because if I click on that, it will also create a new tab, which is the same data set, which is, it can be annoying. We'll close and load. And I just say I don't need table, only create connection. Then what happened is you don't see the extra tab instead of this. You can delete this, by the way. It's not needed. Yep, don't need it. It doesn't really delete the connection. You can see the connection there. Cool. Now, how do you do Power Query? Again, different way to get into Power Query, but usually what I do is I go edit, right click and edit into one of those data sources and bring me back to this Power Query. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a merge, essentially joining the two tables together. So I have the revenue, I have the client, and I want to bring everything about the client or the region, maybe. Maybe the addresses. I'm going to bring the addresses and the region, maybe. So let me just go merge query here. I'm going to merge the query. Merge queries is basically a pen. You can add new columns into the existing table that you're on at the moment, or you can merge it as new, which is creating a new data set. let's be safe here. Let's create a new, not that it's safe, but it's easier for me to explain. So ask you what table you want to merge and say revenue table and the client. And say, cool, how do you join it? You can do client ID and client ID. So this is cool. This is where it gets into the database kind of language, I suppose. You get the left, you get the right outer, you get the full join, you have the inner, left anti, and everything else. So if you think about the Venn diagram, what if you do left, essentially what you're telling the process is try to match the client ID from revenue to client ID in the client table. If you can't find a match, just leave it blank. If you do an inner, if you do right, it's the other way around. But here's the thing: if you do an inner join, only matching rows, you can chat GPT all this, by the way, if I'm not making myself clear. If you do an inner, if you see a client ID there that doesn't exist in the client table, what it does, it will remove the record out of the revenue table. And then you don't want that, because then if someone then go through a report and say, how come the revenue is less than what we have, you start getting into stuff, really. So yeah, most of the time I use left outer join because I kind of want to see if there's an error, what exactly caused it. It just give me a null value. So I'll click OK on this. So, and then after that, okay, cool, we got this. Essentially, okay, I've joined it. This is the table, which is the client table. And then you click on this thing here. And then you can expand it. You can grab the column from the client table that you want to append or add into columns of the revenue table. Or in this case, a new revenue table. And say, okay, cool, I have the client ID. I don't need it. I have the client name. I just want the address and the region. And you can use the original column name as prefix. You don't, because what happens is if you do that, it will say client dot address and client dot cd/region. Helpful if you have column in revenue that have the same name as column in client. I see. I'll also do that. That's usually the thing that I use. Cool. See here? Remember what I mentioned about cardinality? Is this behavior just like a database? It duplicate the rows because that client, Oak Ridge Foods Limited, have 2 addresses in 2 regions. Lookup, if you remember, it just give you the first thing it sees. But just leave it at that for now, yeah? Then cool, I have that new table. I'll call it revenue address. It's a new table, and then I will close and load into a new table. Cool. Now you might think, oh yeah, well, what's the magic about this? But first of all, that whole thing is way faster than lookup. Unfortunately, I don't have an Excel workbook that is like massive, but trust me, and you can test this out. This is way faster than you doing lookup. And within that as well, I should probably mention as well, you can do your other transformation. You can add a new column with the formula. Here, you can add a column. You can do custom function. Function query, you don't have to do with that, but you can do custom column with a bunch of formulas using Power Query formulas, which is the more advanced version of Excel formulas. If you don't know how to write a Power Query formulas, don't worry about it, mate. There's Chat GPT, there's Gemini, just ask AI. Usually it's better. And most of the time it is right, so it is more powerful. The other thing as well that is beautiful is, what happened here? There you go. The other thing that's really powerful is you can basically go change this. Say, actually, Oak Ridge doesn't have Auckland and Christchurch. It's actually Wellington and Christchurch. And then you can just click data. I'll just show you here. I click data, I click refresh all. You see here, Wellington and Auckland is fixed. This is very basic, but imagine this. You can actually get data instead of from a tab. You can get data from a folder, so you can read all the data in the folder in one go. No more copy and pasting and stuff. And then as soon as someone drop a file, as long as the same structure in that folder, you basically can click refresh and everything will just be sucked into this, go through the same process that you've defined before, and then boom, everything is done. Now, that's the powerful thing about Power Query. Yeah. That was a bit long, so I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it's useful for you guys. But to wrap it off, the big payoff of using Power Query is the automation bit of it. You build it once, you just hit refresh. You don't have to do anything else. No more copy and pasting, no more dragging down the formulas. And as I mentioned before, Power Query can actually read data from a lot of sources, including databases, and this might be useful for you guys, and it was useful for me, to be able to read files out of a folder. Imagine if you have a folder, and that folder can contain CSV files. And then what happened every month end is you basically have to open that CSV and copy and paste and append it to the existing data set in the workbook. And then you, I don't know, drag down the formula, and then you click refresh and the pivot table then get refreshed. That can be quite an annoying thing to do. But with Power Query, what you can do is you just drop that CSV file, click refresh, and then Power Query steps will take over and then basically will perform everything in one go. And it's way faster as well. Trust me, it's way faster. And the other beautiful thing about Power Query is the ability to split your logic, your formulas from your data set. Now, what I mean by that is I know a lot of people do this. They might have a very complicated Excel workbook, and what they do is they basically copy and paste the whole, not copy and paste, they copy as another version of that whole workbook, say version 1, version 2, version 3. So if anything changes, not just the data, but also the formula, they'd be able to revert it to whatever version that was working last. That's massive if you think about it. If I've seen workbook that is like nearing 1 GB. I don't know how they ran it, but that's massive. And then to be able to basically track what exactly changed is a hassle, because you have to go through every single tab, go through the formulas, and see exactly what changed. Pretty sure there's tools out there that can do that, but with splitting of the logic and the data, you get the steps in the Power Query. It's basically a text file, and you can quickly see what the steps are and be able to compare what exactly changed. The beauty of that is if your report is broken and you know that your logic hasn't changed because you have this versioning using just simple text file, you can basically flog it off and say to the data team, something's not right with the system. And as a bonus material, I'll show you about the read data from a folder and that whole thing about the separation of the logic and the data. Right, bonus material. So I mentioned before about two things. One is how to get data from a folder. So just quickly here, I'm not going to get into it. I might just make another video on the advanced stuff on Power Query. You can go data, tab again, you can get data, and you can go from file and then from folder. And then you will see the folder, you click on it and you click open, and then you do whatever you need to do. If you see here, it open it, it kind of knows what's available in it. And then you can transform data and do stuff on it. The other thing is how to separate that logic from the data. If you go back to your edit before and go back to Power Query, you'll be able to see these steps. I don't know if you noticed before, every time I do stuff, it kind of create new steps. So let's imagine that. So I say I only want anyone that is in Auckland, so you filter for Auckland. You'll see here, there's a new step there, right? So what you can do with that is you can do advanced editor here. And that basically give you the step-by-step. This is mQuery. It's kind of like a code. It is a code. If you want to, you can just copy and paste this. And you can actually send it to someone else. The beauty of that is you can send it to someone else. Say, I'm just going to do that actually, just to show you guys. Control C. And then I go, where is it? Transform? No, not transform. Is it? I can go right click here, new query. I'll do file. Where is it? Other sources. This looks very different than Power BI. That's what I'm circling. So you go other source, right click on the query tab, go new query, you go to other sources, you go blank query. By the way, this is also transferable to Power BI, so you can actually do the exact same thing in Power BI. So you go to advanced editor, you just copy and paste that exact same thing, and boom, it's the same thing. So the beauty of that is, again, this can be an advanced Power Query thing, but you can basically save that as a text file. It's nothing. And then imagine you have another one and you want to compare it to this version and the last version because it's completely devoid of all the data. You quickly can see, hey, there's a new step there, or hey, you're filtering for this as well. Just by looking at it, you can see it. It makes it very simple to know what's wrong. But yeah, that is the end of the bonus material. Hopefully my first video is useful. Thanks, guys.